Well, folks, hello and welcome back to yet another episode, a very special episode of the Electric Election Podcast. We are joined by one of our sponsors, a gentleman, Martin Durbin, who has gifted me a time of my life here on the Electric Election Roadtrip. He's a senior vice president at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. As I mentioned, they're one of our sponsors. We're so grateful. As well as Benjamin Backer. You know him, you love him. He is our host as well as the founder of the Conservation Coalition. I kind of stole your thunder, but can you describe a little bit of the view behind us, because we have podcast listeners who don't watch, and I think this episode is going to hopefully encourage them to find their ways to the YouTubes or the Facebook and see where we're having our conversation.
Absolutely. Well, welcome to Washington, D.C., and I'm glad that we had a nice weather day here. So here on the rooftop of the Chamber of Commerce, you can see what we get to work with every day. Of course, that's the White House behind you there. But again, welcome here. We appreciate being a partner with the Conservation Coalition.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and you've really been instrumental in helping us get set up with member companies and some of the amazing stories that we've told. So over the past few years, the U.S. Chamber, and especially under your direction, has made it a very large priority to make climate change at the forefront of your work. Why has that been the case, and why is climate change so important to you and your member companies?
Well, I think what's important, and one of the reasons that we're so pleased and proud to be partners with you on this, here you are focusing on what it is the business community is doing out there to address things like climate and sustainability. The Chamber of Commerce, it revised or updated, modified its approach to climate about a year and a half ago, essentially saying that inaction is not an option. And the real focus here is that the business community has got to be a huge part of the solution to climate change. It is the private sector that is going to develop, build, operate, and deploy the technologies we need to be able to not only grow our economy, but to reduce emissions while we're doing it. And your focus on how the market-based policies and the free enterprise system is allowing us to do that. I mean, that's how it always happens. And so we appreciate not only your focus there, but even more so that you're speaking to a younger audience. I may think I'm cool, but my kids would differ with that. And knowing that you're reaching a younger audience that needs to understand exactly what the business community does to address the real problems and solutions in society.
Well, your kids definitely think you're cool because you're engaging in realistic climate solutions, and most people in younger demographics really do think of this as one of their top priority issues.
Well, and people in Washington, D.C. aren't focusing on realistic climate solutions, and that's so important. But when I think
also just quickly, that leaves us with the reasoning as to why the private sector leading is so important, right? Because here in D.C., just a few blocks away, Congress really can't agree on much, even on climate change. And we hope that changes, obviously, and we've had a lot of allied fights in that. But in general, the private sector can move quickly. It can move in an innovative way. It's focused on technology and jobs. And it's really special what the private sector can do when Congress or even state legislatures can't act as quickly.
So, to that point, Benji, it really comes down to what is it the government can do to help enable that activity, and not to make it all negative here. I mean, I put out a blog just 2 weeks ago saying there's a reason for optimism, that we've got some momentum behind us here. Even this year, we've worked very closely with a diverse set of interests, including environmental groups, think tanks, and business organizations, to get Congress to pass legislation that will clarify the role of the government on incentivizing innovation in technology, all different types of technologies, which we can get into the specifics. But again, what's exciting about it is that Congress has been working on this legislation for 2 years, and every piece of it is bipartisan. It's got broad support, and we're still hopeful that they're going to be able to get this over the finish line before the end of the year.
Well, and it's that incentivization mindset that we're seeing all across the United States. I mean, the Conservation Coalition, as I mentioned, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we've gone to cities in South Dakota, we've gone to rural Minneapolis, and we've learned about really technology innovations in every sector. One of the most exciting things for me is the realization that, if you're a local South Dakota Chamber of Commerce, you can be proud that you can make wind turbines, all of them, every single piece pretty much in South Dakota. But going to that kind of difference between, a local Chamber of Commerce or a national Chamber of Commerce, can you kind of give our listeners a little bit of a perspective? What's the difference between the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and, let's say, that same pre-mentioned South Dakota Chamber of Commerce.
Well, the good news is that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, while we represent at the national level, so more federally focused on our policy side, but importantly, we've got a very close relationship with those state and local chambers. To be honest with you, it's that network of support at the local level, local business owners that can carry the message about what businesses can do in solving issues across the spectrum, not just in the climate and energy innovation space, but think about the what's happening now in with response to COVID, in many different ways, whether that's in how to best provide for childcare or the vaccines that are being developed. It's the business community that's stepping in at every step of the way here.
My parents were small business owners, and they had a huge impact on their local community with their small business. And what's been really inspiring and uplifting to see as we've traveled across the country is that there are so many companies, from small startups to large companies, that are making such a huge impact in their communities in terms of jobs and economic growth, but they're also at the forefront of these sustainability solutions that we previously mentioned haven't been as easy to come by here at the national level, and they're happening at the local level. And that's been one of the biggest stories that we've been able to see, is that these are national and international problems, and we'll get into that, but they are being solved at the local level by heroes, honestly, that are small business owners.
Well, it's local to national, right? That's where I think we always miss it. We think it all starts right here and then just gets piped down to America to, save us. But in fact, as we've been going across the country, the answers are in these local districts. Where does the U.S. Chamber of Commerce kind of sit on that and trying to take those stories and really multiply them here working with the elected officials?
Well, two things. First of all, you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't want to minimize the importance of government policy.
No doubt.
Okay, but right now you look at what companies are doing for sustainability, for climate, for planning for the future. I mean, the pressure is coming from their investors, their shareholders, their workers, of course the public and the people they live with in their communities. So regardless of what happens on the policy level here in Washington or down at the state or local level, companies aren't going to stop innovating in this space. They aren't going to stop trying to solve those solutions. So again, that's why I say government can be an enabler to help amplify that even more.
Well, it makes me think of, Benji, Microsoft and Amazon, some of the biggest companies in the world, right in our backyard in Seattle, are driving environmental change in the state of Washington that's kind of had it caught up in the state house, the state senate. They haven't been able to pass an initiative. I mean, that's got to kind of get us excited. We're finding the answer out here on the road.
Well, and I almost think it's a reversal of what the environmental conversation has been in the past, which is the expectation that the government is going to lead the rest of the country. And instead, it's businesses that are taking the lead, and the government can see what's happening in those businesses and say, okay, how do we accelerate this? How do we make this, easier on the businesses? How do we create the jobs faster and create the technology faster? But it's the businesses taking the lead. It's, something that we both love, carbon capture technology. That didn't come because the government said, oh, let's create carbon capture technology. It was a technology that came out of the marketplace. And now we're at a point where we're saying, how do we deploy that quickly? How do we make that cost effective? Because the market came up with it, and now we need to figure out a way to have this public-private partnership. But it's starting at that business level almost first, because they're the ones who come up with the ideas and the technology and the innovation, and then the government can play a role in accelerating that. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And to that, and then getting back to the energy piece of it, so for over 2 years now, here at the Chamber of Commerce, through our Global Energy Institute, we've been focusing on, there's a program called Energy Innovates. And some of these companies that we'll be mentioning here, I mean, I think you visited with some of them, but it's everything from, you get to carbon capture technology. Oxy, Occidental Petroleum, has been using carbon capture for enhanced oil recovery for decades, but they've now got an Oxy low carbon ventures company that's focusing on direct air capture, right? And creating new markets for carbon. But Net Power down in Texas, that is a zero emissions technology that actually takes carbon dioxide, compresses it, puts it back into the system, and burns it. Small modular reactors at NuScale, so nuclear technology that's safer, that doesn't cost as much, and can be deployed anywhere around the world. And of course, things like battery technology. So San Diego Gas and Electric, which is a Sempra company out in California. All these things are what the business community is doing to move these technologies
And they're happening in communities that people might not necessarily expect. I mean, you mentioned Net Power in Texas. People don't have the best kind of perception of Texas on the environment, but there are amazing solutions happening there.
Well, it goes with Greentown Labs in Boston, this innovation hub. They're moving, their next major office is going to be in Houston because they want to be part of this Texas energy innovation that's occurring. Can you go into a little deeper depth on the concept of growth and how that's necessary for us to be able to actually be able to invest in our environment? Because that's been really consistent on this story, whether it's from a tribal leader out in kind of the Olympic Peninsula in Sequim saying, my tribe has to make money. We got to build housing. We got to get good scholarships for our kids. But then we're buying up land from our native, ancestral home and we're starting to preserve those rivers. How important is that to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and what you're doing kind of on energy innovation?
Well, it's absolutely critical. It gets back to the free enterprise, position that you all have been highlighting, and that the Conservation Coalition focuses on as well. As I mentioned before, it's the private sector that's going to have to develop, build, and operate these technologies and deploy these technologies. But what that does is it not only helps us address the environmental problems, but it makes sure that we're continuing to grow from an economic sense as well. And to an earlier point you started to make, this isn't just about the benefits we have here in the United States. We all know climate change is a global issue, right? And so we can do all we can possibly do to reduce emissions here. But if we aren't developing the technologies that will allow the developing world to deploy affordable and emission-reducing technologies, that's where the climate challenge is going to be won or lost. Not just how much we do here, but so again, it gets back to allowing the U.S. to not only grow in this space, but to be the leaders. Technology leaders and economic.
Think of the conversation you had just earlier today in Maryland. As much as we have, economic instability out in the rest of the world, we have people in our own country who we can really help by getting renewable technologies to them and using that as a blueprint to bring to Africa, to bring to China, to bring to some of these other areas. I mean, what's your thoughts on that, Benji?
And on that note, I think you guys have this amazing approach of thinking about this from this all-the-above perspective and knowing that all energy sources are important in this mix. I know how important renewables are and battery storage to the Chamber of Commerce, but can you also talk about the importance, and we've seen this across the board politically on this trip, the importance of working with the oil and gas community on finding the solutions so that we can also, to your point, export that overseas?
Yeah, absolutely. And the oil and gas industry is one that they've been all about innovation, technology, risk-taking, and entrepreneurship. Let's, for a minute, take a step back here. The shale energy revolution. That was an example of the private sector, innovation.
Can you explain what that is for those who don't know?
Absolutely. So this was essentially, you're talking about being able to unlock hydrocarbons, so both oil and natural gas, from a shale rock. Okay, so think of your kitchen cabinet, your kitchen countertop, your granite countertop. The shale that they're drilling in is even thicker than that. Okay, it's less porous than your granite countertop. And through technology, but it's source rock. That's where you're going to find hydrocarbons. And they figured out not only how to get to it and drill through it, but then turn the drill to the side and horizontally drill out a mile or more, which then allowed them to get much more of the oil and natural gas.
Importantly, avoid peak oil, right? We could have been really overwhelmed in our energy sector if they couldn't have made that innovation, and we wouldn't have been able to make this leap now to renewables because a lot of the technology wasn't there when it came to solar or wind before. We needed this shale oil.
So the shale revolution not only got rid of the concept of peak oil. Frankly, it's we won't run out of it. We're not the only country in the world that has these shale resources, okay? But we were uniquely situated from a technology standpoint, from an innovation standpoint, from the infrastructure standpoint of the industry, and there was also the issue of private ownership of the mineral rights. So a company is actually negotiating or cutting deals with individuals who own the property. But what's important as well is that that these are the technologies that now can be exported, as as we've now got all this natural gas. We're exporting natural gas. We're a net exporter of natural gas around the world. That, to our earlier conversation, can be used as a much cleaner source of energy all around the world. And that's here in the U.S. what that meant. We've lowered greenhouse gas emissions from energy sources more than any other country in the world. That wouldn't have happened without the shale energy revolution that allowed us to use more natural gas in power generation.
And I think that speaks to the fact that these issues are very complex, and we're in a time and place where politics is all about kind of three-word sound bites, and it doesn't really, it's not inclusive to the realities that we face as a country and as a globe, which is that we still rely on fossil fuels, and our goal shouldn't be trying to focus on some unrealistic ban of them. It should be focused on how to reduce emissions from them and also encourage the growth of renewables. And that's the stance that the chamber has taken. For young people who really care about this issue, they're the consumers of a lot of the member companies of the chamber, or in some way, shape, or form have a major impact on pretty much every member company. For those who are young consumers watching this, what pieces of advice do you have for them as to how to make this transition faster, how to have these climate solutions in the private sector happen faster? You have kids that are of that age. What would you tell them?
Well, first, they need to, I guess, understand and acknowledge that the business community and industry, it isn't big and bad. It's actually part of the solution, right? And I think they do need to understand, you say, getting back to what's the soundbite here? So the shale energy revolution allowed us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions more than any other technology. Again, it was a disruptive force in the power generation space. And guess what? We're going to have another disruptive force come along at some point here as well. So focusing on this idea of allowing the business community to innovate, allowing the business community to invest, and find what is next. Again, natural gas was totally disruptive to the existing power generation source. What's next?
I want to jump maybe off of that and go to cross-laminated timber and these forest fires, because it's a different part of all that, and it is another piece of innovation in this climate sector space. Do you think we can maybe have a better role as business people, as these people who are doing timber, who know how to go into forests and keep them better maintained? Can the government maybe actually give permits to allow them to go into public lands and actually create that public-private partnership? Can we kind of build this out and not have it just exist in that kind of shale space and have these innovations go into multiple sectors?
Well, I think in any area we ought to be looking at where can we have these public-private partnerships that do allow you to take advantage of the expertise and the experience that the industry has, so that how can we better manage the forests in this case? Clearly that's a very dynamic situation out there with forest fires, but we've got to be able to figure out some better ways of looking forward.
And as you're looking for those public-private partnerships, a question that I think is really important from a business perspective, and that you've been able to see firsthand, is what have been some of the biggest barriers of the government being involved, and where do you see the most benefit of the government being involved in these sorts of policies?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, barrier to some extent is how do we figure out what the appropriate role is, and getting the government to actually put enough resource behind it. I think this is one of those areas where the business community isn't looking for the government to fund it all. I mean, understand this. So we're talking about pre-commercial research and development that the government can play an enormously positive role, and then at some point there does have to be where's the handoff that says now let's make sure the incentives are there for the investment community to say that's one that we can get behind, and it had the support of the government. It helped get it off the ground, and now let's get it into the hands of the private sector that knows how to get these things commercialized, deployed, and frankly making money.
It really makes me think of what you're hoping to do back when you go to Washington, because something Benji's been saying to me on this road trip is, you're connected with so many businesses, some in Washington, who want to spend billions of dollars on environmental issues. They've pledged to do it, but they're actually not sure what they're going to do it on. How can we get the government that wants to spend billions themselves combined with these businesses to create real projects that bring an energy manufacturing revolution that really is already happening, but maybe catalyze it across the United States? What do you kind of think of that, Benji?
Yeah, I think that there are so many missing links right now when it comes to how the public and private sectors can work together, because like you said, Microsoft and Amazon are pledging billions. The government knows it wants to spend some dollars on this, but they don't really know how to, and they're not really they're kind of stuck. And I think it could be to your point, Saul, earlier on this road trip, these companies need to start working together on coming up with those solutions, connecting across sectors to figure out, what are you doing, GM? Well, Microsoft, I'm doing this, and and then also relying on the state and the federal government to teach lessons about what they're doing in the private sector that can work, maybe at the national level. And I think that's where we're kind of missing it. There's so many missing links, and I think if we actually started to connect those dots and maybe started doing some things at the state level to replicate, I think there'd be a lot of potential there.
I got to interrupt you, Benji. I got to encourage everybody out there. I think there is an organization that does that. It's called the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and you can join it and you can be part of a bigger team, because that really is important. I think we always silo ourselves. And to kind of give you as we got about 3-4 minutes left here, a final word on this, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce matters because it breaks you out of that silo and it helps you start to engage on issues you really care about together.
That's right, and brings all those different parts of the economy together. So to your point, while I may be working with part of the chamber that's really focused on the energy and environment and climate sustainability, we've got other expertise in the building that we work very closely with that work with the financial institutions. So what is it they need to be able to to get the investments here? I know there are ideas and proposals that have been instituted at the state level that we expect to come up again at the federal level. Green financing, climate banks, and those types of things that aren't the total answer, and some will argue that might put some private sector dollars on the sideline. But those are all the kinds of ideas we've got to get on the table and figure out how do we best get the investment necessary to take these really breakthrough technologies that are going to help solve this global climate challenge into deployment.
Really like how you said that isn't the only answer, because nothing's going to be the only answer. There are going to be many answers to this problem here in the United States, abroad, everywhere. There are going to be many answers. So before we kind of wrap up with our final question, my last question, and obviously this could be an entire podcast itself, but in your personal opinion, what are some of the most exciting solutions that you think we should be working on today that either are in Congress or at the state level or within the business community?
Well, what excites me at this point is that I think we are starting to see different sides of the debate, if you will, come together. On one hand, you say, hey, the country is so polarized right now, but when you start to look, something we've been working on recently, those who want to build the infrastructure that we need. I'm talking, this is roads, bridges, yes, but I'm talking about the infrastructure we're going to need to address the climate challenge. So if it's in transmission, grid modernization, battery storage, other things we're going to need to deploy these technologies, and then. What we don't have is a clear permitting system at either the federal level or the state level. I would say, just as an aside, if you want to build a new highway, it will take you 7 years to get just a yes or no answer on whether to move forward. That we need to be able to build big things quickly to address the climate challenge. Speed is the common denominator, and I think we've got an opportunity to build a left-right coalition here that says, okay, I get it. We need to have a system, a permitting system that absolutely has comprehensive environmental review and public input, but it shouldn't take 5 years to get a yes or no answer. And then we can really get this show on the road.
There's the best of both worlds so easily there. I know a lot of conservatives that always complain that they can't get their permits fast enough. And then there's a lot of individuals on the left who are like, we can't build that wind farm fast enough. Let's create faster permitting to build that wind farm, to build the solar farm, to invest locally, because we have been seeing it. There is hope out there, and I'm not saying it's not hopeful behind us. It's beautiful behind us here in Washington.
There's more hope outside of DC right now than there is inside.
And kind of to that point, we're only spending about 20 hours here in DC. We drove here to see the U.S. Chamber of Commerce because we believe you're the partner that's really pushing action on climate change right now, and that fits with the Conservation Coalition. We still have another 25 days here left on our journey before we close out on Election Day. What are you hoping we find as a sponsor and as someone who's joined us on this podcast?
Well, I'm excited at what you've already found in the conversations you've had, and as you move forward, you really get to dig in deep with these companies that have innovated, that are finding ways to finance, to deploy, to get things going. I mean, to me, that story isn't told enough. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate what you guys are doing to get that story out there. And as I said, to a younger generation that needs to hear it. I'm going to pick up on the word you use, hope. There is hope here, and there's a lot for us to be optimistic about in this space. And I think, as you've seen, the business community come together, making commitments on what they're going to do in sustainability and climate policy that is not tied at all to any regulation. They're doing it because they believe it's the right thing to do, and that they can do it in a way that's going to help grow the economy, grow their own business, and address these challenges. So, hats off to you guys, and keep up the good work.
Well, if anyone's looking for hope, they have to look straight towards the U.S. Chamber of Commerce businesses. They're at the forefront of this challenge, and the fact that the U.S. Chamber and other local and state-based chambers are also focused on this at a really massive level that is making impactful change right here and right now. We've seen some of those firsthand on this road trip. We're going to see some more. But I want to thank you, Marty, and the entire Chamber of Commerce for, especially over these last few years, the incredible leadership on climate, because it does matter, and it's made a sizable impact that more people need to know about.
Well, and I'll kind of close it out. If you are out there, if you have a business in your local community or nationwide, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce or your local Chamber of Commerce is a great option to get involved. I'm Saul Spady, and honestly, I just got to turn around and look at this view.